Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an everlasting stream. So, let's look at this today. Let's kind of unpack this a little bit today. We're called to look inwardly into the depths of our souls that we might see the sin that's there and deal with it. And then we're called to look outwardly into the places in our world where sin exists and deal with that too. You know, people have always found ways to be exceedingly cruel to other people. The very first family saw jealousy and hatred lead quickly to murder, and of course that's the story of Cain and Abel, the very first family, and we're set up with this. Most of human history is told in terms of conflict, of war, of any one group using people and using whatever power that they have to exploit another group of people. Of course, each story is unique in terms of the people involved and the specifics of the conflict, but underneath it all, isn't it all the same? It's the same ugly traits of unredeemed humanity, greed and power and lust and insecurity and selfishness. So this sermon, again, is about confronting the sin that we see in our world, but also the sin that we see in ourselves. Now, I'm going to ask you to help me out with this, to make a list, okay? Because, hang in there with me, because we're going to go back and look at this list, and we're going to, I think, find two different kinds of things going on here. So I'm not asking you to divulge your deepest, darkest sins, although I got to say, if the Lord's feeling like you need to be free of that, go for it. But just in general, I just would like to just have you just kind of shout out, if you wouldn't mind, and Mark is looking back to see if anybody online types anything in, or Haley, if you would want to do that too. But what are some sins that we as human beings have? So I'll start. Pride, gluttony, okay? Needing to have too much of everything, no matter what that is. Hatred. Selfishness. What else? Jealousy. We could fill a book, everybody, so let's keep going. Sins. Things that we do that God does not like. Lying. Judgment. I wrote that one so hard, my little pen, my pencil went. Idolatry, bigotry, right? We could keep going, right? I mean, I'm sure you're thinking of other things, I would hope at least. Things that you do, things that people have done to you, right? All the stuff that we do, that when we do it, we go, oh man, this God would not be happy with this probably right now. Or maybe it takes a couple months for us to stop and go, oh, right, I should probably not have done that, right? Anybody else, anything else? Bullying. Sins that we commit. And again, if we really think about it, we all do some of these things, right? You go, well, I've never pushed down a kid on the playground. I'm not a bully. But again, think about it in a wider definition, right? Not listening to God, being mean to each other, right? Those are all sins. Unforgiving. Apathy. Not caring. Cheating. Like I said, once you get started, you go, wow, yeah, there's a lot. Well, let me give you a definition of sin. And, I could have, I suppose, gotten this from, I got a whole library full of books. But the best definition I found, believe it or not, was in Christianity for Dummies. Sin is any deliberate action, attitude, or thought that goes against God. I'll say it again. Sin is any deliberate action, attitude, or thought that goes against God. Sin includes both things you shouldn't have done, but did, and that's called a sin of commission, and things you shouldn't have done, that you should have done, but you didn't. And that would obviously be a sin of omission. So let's think about our list. We all almost, right, had sins of commission, things that we do, right? We judge people, we bully people, we hate people, we have prejudice, we're selfish, we're apathy towards people, we cheat, we're unforgiving. And again, that one almost, didn't it, kind of took us over to that other side, right? Because what's the other side? Omission. Things we should do. That's a sin. If there's something that God wants us to do that we know is the right thing to do, but we don't do it, guess what, folks? That's a sin too. A sin of omission. When you don't help somebody in need, when you don't forgive them, right? Anybody else think of any other sins of omission? When we don't do something that we need to be doing? But I bet we can think of things, right? And I hope by doing this little exercise that maybe this week things will come to you when you go, oh, you know, I really should go do such and such. Yeah, because that's really what God would want people to do. If Jesus would be here right now, he would be doing this. That's what I need to do. So you would be not having a sin of omission or a sin of commission of doing something to hurt another person. We need to listen to the continued prophetic cry for us to be what God has called us to be in our world. This way we can stop being a part of the sinful societal realities and begin to be a part of working for justice, especially for the poor and the vulnerable. So here's another definition for you. This is the definition of social justice according to the New Oxford American Dictionary. And it's justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. Aristotle in the Politics said justice ensured that individuals both fulfilled their societal role and received what was their due from society. Over the years, these benefits and rights have come to include public education, access to health care, social security, the right to organize, and a broader other spectrum, distribution of wealth, equal opportunity, right? These are all things that we kind of know in our heads, oh yes, that's what social justice is. But again, I question, have any of us, I'm guessing that some of us sitting here right here today, have run across of social injustice. Either us ourselves have been subject to that, or some of our friends perhaps. Joseph Joubert, a French moralist and essayist, said this, and I really like this quote: justice is truth in action. Justice is truth in action. Who could be against justice, really, right? If there's one thing that the laws and the prophets, and especially Jesus, agree on, it's justice for all, regardless of background or social status. And again, we have it in our own Pledge of Allegiance, right? How does it end? With liberty and justice for all. According to N.T. Wright in Simply Christian, Why Christianity Makes Sense, Our Longing for Justice, he says that that just comes as just being a human being, that sense of justice and needing justice for all people comes with it. But unfortunately, although we all strive for justice, we often fail to achieve it. And then Wright says this, and I think it's kind of interesting to think about. You fall off your bicycle, you break your leg. You go to the hospital, they fix it. You stagger around on crutches for a while, then rather gingerly you start to walk again. There is such a thing as fixing something that is broken, right? For some of us, maybe not so good if we have like a lawnmower at home that's still not quite fixed, right? But for the most part, if something is broken, you can get that fixed. So why can't we fix injustice? And you know what? It isn't from lack of trying. And yet, in spite of failures to fix injustice, I think we all keep dreaming that one day all broken things will be set right. That's what Jesus says, right? That all things will be made anew. Wright says again, Christians believe this is so because all humans have heard deep within themselves the echo of a voice which calls us to live with a dream for justice. Martin Luther King Jr., right? I have a dream. And followers of Christ believe that in Jesus that voice became human and did what had to be done to bring it about. I think I mentioned to you that Patrick Felton, some of us took a social justice and theater or drama Bible study. And the text that we used was the Social Justice Bible. And I was going to bring it out and I forgot, but it's in my office. And instead of having the words of Jesus all in red like some Bibles are, it's every time there is anything at all written, either said by Jesus or just written about social justice issues, any of those. And it's amazing, even just flipping through the Bible, to see the amount of red that is in there, of how often that Jesus deals with this. And not just Jesus, but the Old Testament as well, in the Hebrews. So the Hebrew word for justice, you probably maybe heard this, is mishpat. And it occurs in various forms more than 200 times in the Old Testament. And its most basic meaning is to treat people equitably. It means acquitting or punishing every person on the merits of the case. Acquitting or punishing every person on the merits of the case, regardless of race or social station. Anyone who does the same wrong should be given the same penalty. Mishpat, then, is giving people what they are due, whether it's punishment or whether it's care. And this is why, if you look at every place that word is used in the Old Testament, several classes of people continually pop up. You see this in the Social Justice Bible, which again is the regular Bible, just highlighting those sections that they talk about, especially these persons. Mishpat describes taking up the care and cause of widows, orphans, immigrants, and the poor. They've been called by many the quartet of the vulnerable, okay? Widows, orphans, immigrants, and the poor, you see over and over again, because those were the classes or the groups that were unrepresented in that time. In pre-modern agrarian societies, these four groups, again, had no social power. They lived at a subsistence level and were only days from starvation if there was any famine or invasion or even minor social unrest. So again, today, though, this quartet would be expanded, right, to include, I'm sure you could think of some different people. Maybe you would agree or not agree with my list. The refugee, the migrant worker, the homeless, many single parents, the very elderly. The mishpat or justice of a society, according to the Bible, is evaluated by how it treats these groups. Any neglect shown to the needs of the members of this group are not merely a lack of mercy or charity, but a violation of justice, of mishpat. God loves and defends those with the least economic and social power, and you know what? So should we. That's what it means to do justice that we read about in Micah. Why should we be concerned about the vulnerable ones? You know, why? Well, it's because God has been introduced from the very beginning as the defender of these vulnerable groups. The biblical writers introduce God as a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows. That's from Psalm 68. This is one of the main things that God does in the world, identify with the powerless and take up the cause. Do you remember last week's sermon? Beatitudes. Who's blessed? The poor, the weak in spirit, all these different, the poor in spirit, all these different groups that our society would say, oh yeah, they just are. No, blessed are they. And Jesus would take up their cause. We should have a strong concern for the poor. But you know what? There's more to justice, the biblical justice, than what we just have talked about. We get further insight if we consider a second Hebrew word that can be translated to being just or being righteous. For in Hebrew, understanding to be one is to be the other. And so that word is tzedakah, tzedakah. And it refers to a life of right relationships. And again, there's so much to these ancient Hebrew terms, just like agape. When you say agape, what does that mean? Love. No, yes, but it means there's layers and layers upon what these words mean. Most modern people see the word righteousness in the Bible, and they tend to think in terms of a private morality, right? I'm righteousness. So maybe that's like I'm diligent in prayer, or study my Bible. But in the Bible, tzedakah refers to day-to-day living, in which a person conducts all relationships in family and society with fairness, generosity, and equity. This is what God wants us to be, right? In every aspect of our lives. We're not just holy in church, right? We're supposed to be sharing that holiness from our life with fairness and generosity and equity in every aspect of our lives. It's not surprising then to discover that tzedakah and mishpat together are in the Bible many, many times, those two terms together in the Hebrew Bible. And they roughly correspond to what some have called primary or rectifying justice. So again, maybe just to put an English name to the Hebrew term. I just want to just look at this just really quickly. Rectifying justice is mishpat. So it means punishing wrongdoers and caring for the victims of unjust treatment. As I had said, punishing those who did wrong, no matter what they look like, no matter what their ethnicity is from, punishing those who do wrong, and then also caring for those who have been unjustly treated. And then primary justice, or tzedakah, is behavior that, if practiced in the world, would render rectifying justice unnecessary. I love that. That if we all would be showing fairness and equity and love to everybody, then nobody would be doing all these other things of I need to steal, and then we need to punish you for doing that. If we all would just have a more equitable and just and loving world. And I totally get that that's very simplistic. I understand that. But understand, I hope, where I'm coming from of that it would make a huge difference in our world. Examples of rectifying justice or mishpat would mean, for example, prosecuting men who batter or exploit or rob women, or vice versa, women who do that to men. It could mean respectfully putting pressure on a local police department until they respond to calls and crimes just as quickly to the poor side of town as they do to the not-so-poor side of town. Another example would be an organization that prosecutes and seeks justice against loan companies that prey on the poor or the elderly with dishonest practices. I mean, again, your mind just starts going and whirling of all the different things that could be done. Primary justice, or tzedakah, might mean taking the time to personally meet the needs of someone who is extremely elderly or sickly or hungry or handicapped and unable to care for themselves. Or keeping the establishment of new nonprofits to serve the interests of these classes of persons. And again, some of us even sitting here today have even done that. It could be a group of families from a more prosperous side of town adopting a public school in a more not as elite or poorer part of the community, and making donations or pro bono work to help those in that part of town. When these two words, tzedakah and mishpat, are tied together, and that happens at least over 36 times, by the way, in the Hebrew Bible, the English expression that best conveys that meaning is social justice. And that's where we're kind of trying to end up today, is social justice. If you're trying to live a life in accordance with the Bible, the concept and call to justice are inescapable. We do justice when we give all human beings their due as creations of God. Each person as a creation from God. Doing justice includes not only righting the wrongs, but preaching generosity and an interest in social concern, especially towards the poor and the vulnerable. And again and again in the Gospels, Jesus angrily challenges the religious authority. He mocks them for their self-promoting ways. He alienates the elite by spending time with and showing favor to the poor and the marginalized. He talks to women, which again was nobody at that time. You didn't give women a chance to speak, or you certainly didn't listen to their opinions. He spoke with women. He ate without regards of the dietary rules that everybody else said, oh, see, I'm following the right rules. Look at me, everybody. He didn't care about all that stuff. He healed those considered unclean and returned them to wholeness. He questioned current laws and challenged the status quo. And as a result, he became a target for those in authority. And ultimately, those authorities killed him. Nevertheless, Jesus showed us that there are times when we must stand up and express truth to power in constructive and meaningful, but yet unyielding ways, despite the possible consequences. Consider how often and how many ways Jesus expressed anger in the gospel. Not violence, but anger. But he was clear and he was direct direct, bringing about justice or revealing malice or ignorance. He made no personal attacks, but sought to uncover evil behind the actions. There's no record of Jesus being angered by a personal offense, no matter how wrong or unjust or violent it may be. He lived and he taught that the one who is persecuting us is also created in the image of God. And so in that reality, then, we need to love our enemy. So just as God is righteously angered over oppression and injustice, again, so should we. And learning how to balance these teaching and actions is a lifelong process and takes a lot of discernment. Because maybe what I think is injustice, you think is the opposite. So we have that whole piece, too, of praying to God to help open our eyes to discernment. Or to open our eyes of, boy, I've always been real about this. But you know what, God? You've opened my eyes to, wait a minute. Maybe it's this instead. So it's not digging in the trenches of just of assumptions, but it's asking God to help us to see clearly what would be the ways that he would want us to step forward to promote justice. Think about the Good Samaritan, right? He was the only one who stopped to help the injured man. He wasn't good just because of his origins or because he was traveling. Instead, he looked around him and he saw this person in need, a human in need. That was all he saw, was a human. And he got involved. He gave up time and money and most likely status and respect, really, when people found out. And he went about his day then, and he loved, and he had righted an injustice. There are many ways in which people of faith can be involved in helping set things straight. And again, this is my list. Your list can be different if that's how God calls you. My list is advocating for common sense gun laws, or working towards offering much needed services for those suffering from mental illness, or encouraging governments to shelter the homeless and work together with the social service agencies, to visit men or women in prison, to help clothe children in need, to serve those with special needs, to work with youth who need an adult mentor. The needs are endless, right? And the injustices are everywhere. But if we can just start taking those steps, and again, many of you have been. Maybe many of you have been working for social justice issues for years. Or maybe you've just been busy and doing your thing, and maybe now is the time that you can kind of look and see, man, here's a cause I really believe in. Not so much these other causes. Maybe Pastor Jenny mentioned things I don't agree with. But this other thing, wow, Jesus would come and do something about this. That's what I want to give my attention to and my passion to. That's the beauty of it, is that we're all called to serve in the way that God calls us to serve. We need to ask ourselves, how can our sense of outrage at injustice, maybe at a particular injustice, or just injustice in general to a particular group of people or individuals, how can that be channeled into loving action? We as members of Haskins Community Church, I believe, have an obligation. We as Christians have an obligation, a mandate, to work for social justice just as Jesus did. We need to be angry at instances of injustice, speaking truth and love to our friends, our neighbors, our legislators, our world. When we witness wrong done to others, particularly those who do not have the strength or the means to defend themselves, then as people of faith, we need to express the anger of love. The anger that gives us boldness and outspokenness to defend what is right and just, again, in a firm but a loving way. We have to remember, to whom much has been given, much will be required. So I encourage you this week, as you are reading through the scriptures, maybe even rereading these difficult ones to read. And I know it's hard because right now some of us are barely keeping our lives together, much less thinking about this other person who maybe has it worse than we do, doesn't have a voice and to speak and to right wrongs. But at the same time, we know that's what is needed to be done. And we also know, not to be selfish about it, but sometimes our own lives get put in perspective, right? When we can see other people who have it so much worse than we do, we can be so thankful for what we do have, then suddenly it doesn't seem so bad, and then we're able to go and help with a better attitude in our lives. We're able to go out and help those people in need. So I pray again for this Social Justice Sunday, and again, it's every day, every Sunday, right? Should be Social Justice Sunday, right? In many, many ways. But I just pray again that God speaks to you, that you really open your heart and soul and spirit up to God to see if this is something that He's calling you to do, and if so, in what area. Because again, how beautiful that's going to be if each and every one of us moves forward in showing love to all people, because that's what the bottom line is, right? Is showing love and care and mercy to every single person. May it be so. Amen.